Hi, I want to make a video on the subject of perceiving inside the bubble of existence. And I guess what I mean when I say that is that, like I mentioned before, when you're perceiving inside the bubble of existence, you can only do so much to change the existence you're in. Sort of like you're in the existence, you have to play by the rules of the bubble of existence you're living in. Like I mentioned, qualitative versus quantitative. You're in the bubble, and the bubble means more than the quantity inside the bubble or, of the bubble. The numbers are intangible, but they perceive they exist in the existence by their very number, the quantity. They exist, but the numbers don't exist. The numbers only exist through the number of things, the quantity of things. So yes, inside the bubble, you're perceiving inside of the bubble, and like I mentioned, you can't perceive outside the bubble because if there is no outside the bubble, but if there were hypothetically outside the bubble, you can see what was going to go on. In a certain way, you can look through a crystal ball and see what's happening around you, but that doesn't mean you're going to see what's going to happen, because if you can perceive inside the bubble, you can decide to change what's inside the bubble. I've mentioned this before in a different context, but if you do that and you can perceive, you can change what would happen. And you're not going to follow exactly what's going to happen. If you know you're going to be killed, you're going to change it. If you know you're going to be killed, it doesn't matter. You're going to change the outcome. You're going to be horribly mutilated. You're not going to say, okay, I'm going to do that. I see exactly. I'm going to leave mirror, mirror on the wall. Tell me I'm going to die. What can I do to stall? You're going to do something, and it's going to end up. You're going to change it. You can only perceive based off of implications or based off of probability, possibility more than probability. You can only do so much to change that, and that's all you can do. You're inside the bubble, and you can only do so much to understand. Say, like a meteorologist, a weather forecaster knows how to change what's going to go on based on the weather patterns, and using those implications to see what he can do to change or not change, but do his best. And if we had weather changing, change the weather, use that knowing the right time, doing the right value equations, understand what's worth it and what's not worth it, using this to change this, or knowing what's going to happen, or doing this to imply this, and say we can do this to change the circumstances, knowing, oh, I shouldn't go out tonight, I shouldn't drive anywhere because the weather's going to be bad, using those implications, understanding the implications, and using those to your advantage, and understanding what is and what isn't the right thing, or understanding what could or couldn't happen based off of previous things that are happening, based off of implications and those things that we can understand based off of cause and effect and interaction. Um, so yes, implications and things like that, and indications can be a good, well, warning sign to describe a certain situation. So yes, um, we're perceiving inside the bubble of existence. I mean, this has been brought up in many a video. I mean, even it's the videos I've made. It's very all-encompassing kind of subject that you have to mention when you're describing things like determinism, or describing things like time travel, or a god, theology, theism, describing these things outside of a bubble, and how that's a disconnect. If we had contact with God and he knew what was going to happen, a simple interaction with him, he would be part of the mechanism. Therefore, he's not a god. If he's outside the mechanism, yet he's inside the mechanism, can interact with us, then he's not really a god, is he? It's divine intervention kind of thing. But then if he's outside of it, he doesn't exist because there's no outside the bubble. Oh, you can't prove it. Well, yeah, you kind of can, because if there is a outside the bubble, it has to be proven to exist. And sort of like in other circumstances, like I mentioned, a fourth dimension that which something else exists in, it obviously has to have a means to which then to have a way of manifesting. And if it can manifest, it's part of the same perceived system. If it can become part of the system, it's part of the system to begin with. And there's no outside of the system to begin with to come in from, except from, say, another dimension which doesn't exist theoretically as well. It only exists theoretically, whatever. So yes, you can't exist and go in and exist in and out of the mechanism. There's only inside the mechanism. There's no outside bubble because there's nothingness on the outside bubble. And there's no sitting there on the toilet waiting to create an existence. You're not sitting on the toilet. You're not doing anything. If there's no mind over matter, there's no matter to which to house this mind. There is no mind. If there's no mind, it's not a mind. It's not a disembodied anything. It's nothing. The only God we can have is the disembodied nothingness that existed, and allowed us to have the space to explode, the capability to explode, and nothing is existing beyond that mechanism that allowed us to have the little interaction that, burst and banged us, to have, theoretically speaking, the theory, right? Yeah, yes. But, the Big Bang Theory creating us out of an explosion. Beginning and end. Nothingness means more than, say, something infinite. Nothingness has more continuity or understanding, or meaning has more of a meaning to more understanding than, say, something like infinity. So I'd say obviously the Big Bang seems more conceivable than something existing forever, which is a concept that means just forever until it ends, really, basically. So therefore, forever until it ends, forever means forever, going until you stop in the 8, the infinity 8 symbol. You go until you stop. Therefore, yes, there was a nothingness that began infinitely until it decides the end. We don't know. So what's this called? It's going to last for an infinity. Well, it's not going to last for an infinity, but it existed for an infinity. But in the sense that we can't describe it that way, because there's a finite point in which we can exist. That we existed based on an explosion. So therefore, we can imply that yes, we don't know if it's going to last an infinity, but we call it infinity to make it ambiguous to understanding exactly how long something will last. It could last infinity, but it's not really. It's going to end at a certain point. So I guess putting it in that context, you can just say it's finite. It's going to end to a certain degree. And we can obviously understand the outside edges of the universe and how they end and how they create boundaries. And if there's a boundary, that's finite. There's a boundary, it's finite. If it's infinite, then it's finite in a circle, right? You're just going around in a circle. I'm back. I just went this way, like an Earth. It's spherical. I went back to the same point. It's finite. There's only so many photons. There's only so many things spreading out and doing so many things. Infinite doesn't make much sense unless you put it in the right context, like I mentioned before. You do it until you end up stopping. Describing a circumstance where you say you create a symbol where it can keep going continuously until you decide to stop. You can describe it in a different context, describing the universe and how it began and ends, if it's going to end, theoretically or whatever. But you can describe it in different ways, and you describe it, not only that, but describe it as a finite universe, knowing that it will end because it started at a certain point as well. So, yes. So you're perceiving inside the bubble, and like I mentioned before, there's no outside the bubble, so if it's inside the bubble, it's not a Jesus or God, it's just some floating Cthulhu mythical creature floating around. But that doesn't mean it's a God, because it can be interacted with. It can be activated. It's not a God, it's just part of the interaction that exists in the universe, because it's part of the deterministic mechanism that's controlling us and him. So if he's in the universe, or it's in the universe, the it, like the movie or the book, a novel, yes, if it's like that, then it's not a God. It's just the presence that's interacting in the same mechanism. Whatever powers it has doesn't mean anything. It's still part of the mechanism moving, based on a deterministic mechanism. So if it comes in, it's part of the deterministic mechanism now. Therefore, it's either had to exist in the mechanism, or it just happened. Yeah, it just happened to have been born in the mechanism. It can't be existed outside the mechanism, because there's no outside the mechanism, because there's only reality inside the mechanism. If there's reality outside the mechanism, like I mentioned before, then it's like a black hole thing, or at least to a fourth dimension. But it's still a way in which it's connected to the same reality. If there's a connection, then it means that it's part of the same reality. Doesn't matter if you see 4D squares or whatever, or 5D squares, or 6D cylinders and trapezoids and whatever. It doesn't matter. That's contrived to begin with, because it doesn't exist. But even if so, it doesn't matter. It's part of the same continuity. If it can be continuous, there is no existence in that way. And it can't be outside, like I mentioned, because there is no outside, because there's nothing outside. But there is no outside to begin with. There's just a there, and that's it. It's here, there's space, and that's it. And since it's impossible for us to move beyond the means of the universe, we're not going to really see it. The end of the universe could just be, you're not going to really, it could really just be a wall. You can't move beyond, a force, a barrier, force field, whatever. Beyond the that point, there is no boundary out. There's only a boundary, and the boundary's like the boundary of a wall in your house or whatever it is. It's enclosed, and it's part of the mechanism. If you can come in, then it's part of it. It's not. There's no coming in. It's either it is or it isn't. And there is no outside. And at least, obviously, it can't be proven, because there's nothing on the outside. And if there is something on the outside, it's part of the reality. So you get the point. There's an outside. It's part of the reality. So therefore, it's not an outside. It's synonymous with the inside of the reality. And if there is an inside, then it's part of the reality. So therefore, it's inside the reality. You can't say it's on the outside of reality, affecting us from the outside. We can't affect it from the outside. So therefore, there's only an inside of the reality. There's only an inside. There's only a barrier controlling what's happening on the inside, an enclosed environment. and everything's going to have an effect on everything regardless of the extent. There's going to be an effect because there's an interaction that's existing. So regardless, it's something that exists regardless. It's a synonymous distinction, pointless distinction. It exists in the same function, and it's regardless in ways. I mean, I think you may not understand, sort of like subconsciously, things happening 50 miles away from you may not affect you knowingly. All these little interactions have an effect on you regardless. So like throwing a ball in a room, it doesn't matter if the ball's, not, bounced off of no balls in the room. You throw from a ceiling that's, no longer there, a roof. You remove the roof and you throw a ball in a room of other balls or a balloon. It doesn't matter if the balloon lands over here. Even though it's impossible, even if it lands right there, it's still having interaction. It has vibrations moving around and affecting them at least slightly. And even if that, it's not a direct interaction, it's an indirect interaction. It causes this happen over here. It caused the smoke to go in the air. It caused condensation or precipitation, causing this to happen over here, there. This interaction happened. They couldn't come here because there's something that happened over there. They had an interaction. The guy came late because 50 miles away. Guy happened over. He had this previous customer 50 miles away couldn't do it. Was too late and it had an effect on you. I mean, all these things have an effect, regardless of indirect or direct. Like I mentioned, corn on the cob or whatever it is, interaction has an effect, regardless. It's sort of like it doesn't matter if it's a direct effect, like having that direct effect of knowing the carpenter has to come today, and he has to be here around 6 o'clock. It's a direct effect because it's a direct interaction you have. But any indirect interaction you have, that's interacting, sort of like someone stomping their foot to a musical note 50 miles, 100 miles, wherever away from you, almost seeming like it would be significant, still has an effect on you because that stopping could have had an effect on this, causing mind interactions, causing this to happen, causing something to lead to a certain point to happen a certain way. Obviously, it has an effect regardless, because all these things lead up to an effect regardless of the effect they have. They all are significant, like I've mentioned before, to a certain extent, because all these effects lead up to an effect that can mean something in the end, and therefore that effect has effect on this, this, and this, and it all means something in the end because it all has an interaction, because these interactions rely on previous interactions, and since all these interactions are in the same closed environment, all these previous interactions have an effect on the interactions happening now and in the future, everywhere, because it's an enclosed environment. So I think that's all I want to say on this subject. So perceiving inside the bubble of existence. That's the only way we can perceive is inside the bubble of existence, and there's nothing we can do about it. That's all we can do. Perceive inside the bubble of existence. Sorry. So yes, that's it. Anyway, yes. Yes. That's all I need to say, I guess. So if I have anything else to mention on this subject, I'll mention in another video. So, yes. Perceiving inside the bubble of existence. You can only do so much. Really, you can only do so much. So thank you, and until next time, bye.